Kitsch is when you come to somebody's house and it's simply too much. It's blinking everywhere, shiny stuff is dangling from the ceiling, hanging on the walls. The whole place is overloaded with embellishments. It's garish, exaggerated, just bad taste. Tacky or cheesy might be the best English translations. Kitsch is naive, childish, and often working with cliches. Kitsch is cheap, not necessarily cheap in the sense of not costing much money, but just cheap. It's too straightforward to be seen as art. Garden gnomes are perhaps the most classic expressions of kitsch, or cheap paintings for tourists, which are technically correct but lack originality. We find kitsch everywhere. There is consumer kitsch, political kitsch, religious kitsch, even terrorist kitsch. There are many definitions of kitsch, but the most pertinent one might be the one saying that in kitsch, one single component of an object is highlighted and exaggerated. The shoes are simply too red. They are so red that you can no longer see the shoes. The movie is so sad that everybody is crying. Spectators have stopped caring about the plot, the pictures, the meaning. There is kitsch when Beethoven's ta-ta-ta-ta theme is repeated until it becomes a pop song, leaving out the more complex context of the symphony. There is kitsch when Mona Lisa is printed on a pillowcase. Kitsch can be produced in many ways. We have kitsch when an artist follows a ready-made formula, like in the paintings of Thomas Kincaid. They are repetitive and formulaic. We have kitsch when a non-kitsch item is placed in the wrong context. For example, when you hang a real Rembrandt in the elevator. Historically, kitsch arose in the late 19th century when societies became industrialized. Rural people streamed into the cities to work in factories. There, they earned some supplementary money that they could spend on decorative items. They had not much education and bought what would be called kitsch today. Also, factories could produce decorative items for their new working class population for very little money. Later, plastic became the typical material that kitsch items were made of. Earlier, the bourgeoisie had replaced the aristocracy and imitated an aristocratic style that they did not always fully understand. These are probably the earliest examples of kitsch. But in general, kitsch is linked to industrialization. Despite that, kitsch is not always cheap. It is also, and increasingly, the taste of the new money, or the nouveau riche. Some people want to show their wealth to the world, and often they find ridiculous ways to do so. There is probably today more kitsch in the world than ever before. One reason is that today kitsch spreads very quickly through the social media. But do we have the right to say that something is kitsch? Is it not simply a matter of taste? That is it not purely subjective? Kitsch is bad taste, but who decides what taste is good and what taste is bad? What is kitsch for person A might be the most beautiful art for person B. Is kitsch not just in the eye of the beholder? True, there are rules about kitsch. Kitsch is inappropriate, trite, superficial, sweet, fake, sentimental. But who establishes these rules? Some people, let us call them kitsch liberals, say that kitsch does simply not exist. There is no kitsch, but there are only different tastes. You can say that you don't like it, but don't say that it's kitsch, because then you are putting it down. Just say that it's different. I do not agree with this perception. True, kitsch is a matter of taste. But when various people come together and share a certain taste, and when all of them find that something is kitsch rather than not, then they establish an aesthetic community, which can talk about kitsch as a shared concept. In that sense, kitsch does exist. Now only for them, and maybe not for others. But that's still something. There's a lot of confusion about the definition of kitsch, and much of it is due to the fact that people do not understand that kitsch on the one hand and the use of kitsch on the other are two different things. First, let us be very clear. Kitsch is bad art or not art at all. It is an aesthetic expression that lacks the minimum of sophistication required for art. Period. However, here comes the twist. It is possible to use kitsch in an ironic fashion, and then it becomes something different. You might like an item because it is so much kitsch. What are you doing then? You use the kitsch item, but you do not consume it in the way it was initially meant to be consumed. The typical kitsch consumer consumes kitsch as kitsch, but he does not know that it is kitsch. The typical kitsch consumer consumes kitsch as kitsch, but he does not know what kitsch is. But when you say that you like kitsch as kitsch, or that you like kitsch because it is kitsch, then you are already creating a critical distance between yourself and the kitsch item. You do not simply consume kitsch as beautiful, but you use it for a purpose that is more complex than simple kitsch consumption. For example, you put a certain kitsch item into a more interesting context in your house. That means that you are on top of kitsch and not a victim of kitsch. Artists do precisely this, and this can be called kitsch art, which is different from kitsch. The works of pop art, Warhol, Jeff Koons, are based on this principle. Pop art is not kitsch, but it uses kitsch in a sophisticated fashion. That brings us to another term, camp. Camp follows the rules of ironic kitsch that I have just outlined. To most people, the distinction between kitsch and camp is not clear, and often people who say that they like kitsch confuse kitsch and camp. Camp is a kind of retro kitsch, a kitsch that has obtained a supplementary value because it is collectible. Camp contains kitsch elements, but these elements are consumed in a more complex fashion than simple kitsch. Camp is nostalgic, and often it tries to retrieve a lost past. In contrast, kitsch takes place in a flat present. It leads to instantaneous satisfaction and leaves no place for reflection. Camp is often ambiguous and can even contain social criticism. Like kitsch art, camp is ironic and a self-conscious kind of kitsch. It is not simply overwhelming, which is the case for the experience of kitsch.